Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Atlantic Council. I'm Barry Pavel. I'm Vice President here and Director of the Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security, which proudly hosts the Commander Series. Thanks for joining us for this conversation with Admiral Kurt Tidd to take a strategic look at what Southern Command does to help execute the country's defense and security strategy. Admiral, it's a pleasure to host you today. Thanks for taking the time. Today's discussion is part of our Commander Series, generously supported by Saab North America, represented this afternoon by its Executive Vice President, Wes Walters. And it's my pleasure to thank Saab again for its longstanding support of this important venue. Since the series began, believe it or not, in 2006, top military and defense leaders have used it as a platform to help shape the military and defense debate regarding America's role on a range of global challenges, ranging from Eastern Europe to the Middle East, Asia, and beyond. And we've even brought in service chiefs to outline how they're preparing U.S. forces for these challenges. And today we look forward to hearing about how Latin America fits into this larger picture. The time is quite ripe for a conversation about security in the region. The Obama administration has demonstrated serious commitment to deepening and strengthening ties with a range of countries, most notably through the historic revival of diplomatic relations with Cuba, but also through Vice President Biden's Caribbean Energy Security Initiative, launched in 2014. The Atlantic Council launched our own Adrian Arsht Latin America Center in late 2013, and it quickly made impressive strides. In its first months, the center released a national poll, the first of its kind, demonstrating the stark change in American attitudes towards U.S.-Cuba relations, attitudes that contributed to President Obama's decision to normalize relations with Cuba. The center also has been ahead of the curve in highlighting the energy transformation in Latin America and their geostrategic implications, comprehensive analysis on Mexican energy reforms, along with insight into the future of PetroCaribe, the Venezuela-led oil alliance in the Caribbean, and new energy horizons for Argentina. Director Peter Schechter here and his team have done a remarkable job of addressing the key role that energy developments play in the region's prosperity and hemispheric integration. And finally, the Arsht Center has been working on 3 exciting new initiatives. First, the Colombia Peace and Prosperity Task Force will provide outside and independent support to U.S. backing for sustainable peace during this time of exciting transition and post-conflict development in Colombia. Second, the North Triangle Task Force, a comprehensive locally driven strategy that will give recommendations on how to improve security and economic development in the 3 countries. And then finally, the Why Mexico initiative, in which I played a little role myself, which is designed to combat some of the divisive rhetoric surrounding the U.S.-Mexico relationship, reinforce its importance through an aggressive social media campaign to make sure that facts inform our debate about our discussions with our southern neighbor and the critical relationship. The Brent Scowcroft Center also works on Latin America, and in today's discussion, we'll focus indeed on the security issues, which many of you know about. The region possesses some of our closest trading partners, including Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil, but economic woes and political turmoil continue in places like Venezuela that threaten to reverberate throughout the entire region. How the U.S. manages Southern Command's area of responsibility, which includes security cooperation efforts with the 45 nations and territories of Central and South America and the Caribbean Sea, an area of 16 million square miles, matters not only today, but for the future of the Western Hemisphere and international security. Among the issues Admiral Tidd and his team must address are helping to define the relationship with Cuba, continuing to build our partnership with Colombia, understanding the perils and potential of Venezuela's trajectory, and continuing to collaborate across the board with Mexico. For this event, we are live tweeting from the Scowcroft Center account, which is at AC Scowcroft, and we're using the hashtag AC Defense. It's now my pleasure to invite Wes Walters of Saab North America to the podium to introduce Admiral Tidd. Wes, the floor is yours, and thanks again to Saab for supporting this effort.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here as part of the Atlantic Council and to introduce our distinguished guest. Our sponsorship of the Commander Series and our relationship with the Atlantic Council is very important to Saab because of our European heritage, our close U.S. and Swedish bilateral relationships and the importance of the transatlantic link. We are a global defense and security company that started as a small aircraft company providing military aircraft to the Swedish government. We now operate across the world and across an even wider range of products, sectors, and customers. We serve the global market with our products, services, and solutions within defense, civil security, and the commercial aeronautics sector. We have a wide portfolio of solutions that includes fighters, submarines, airborne early warning systems, missiles, shoulder-fired weapons, training solutions, and signature management products. The U.S. market is very important for us. We've been here 40 years. We continue to grow our portfolio here through three main pillars: marketing our organic product line, partnership with U.S. industry and the government, and a focused M&A strategy. As a global company, we have interest in several regions of the world, one being Latin America, where we have a dedicated market area focus. So it would be great to hear from our speaker about that region. It is a privilege and a great honor for me to introduce our special guest, Admiral Kurt Tidd, the 23rd Commander of U.S. Southern Command. Admiral Tidd assumed command 14 January 2016 and has a very long and distinguished career of service to the United States. He's commanded at all levels, had key staffs, positions, served at sea, onshore, in the Pentagon, internationally, in NATO, SOUTHCOM, CENTCOM, during combat and in peace. Admiral Tidd was commissioned from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1978 with a degree in Foreign Area Studies. He is an Olmsted Foundation Scholar, a French linguist, and also holds a master's degree in political science from the University of Bordeaux, France. He is also a graduate of the Armed Forces Staff College and was a Federal Executive Fellow with the Atlantic Council. At sea, he commanded U.S. Naval Forces Southern Command and the U.S. 4th Fleet. He also commanded Carrier Strike Group 8 aboard USS Dwight D. Eisenhower during combat deployment supporting coalition forces during Operation Enduring Freedom. From 2004 to 2005, he commanded Persian Gulf Maritime Operations as Commander, Middle East Force, and Commander, Task Force 55. He also served as Commander, Destroyer Squadron 50, Commanding Officer of the USS Arthur Radford, and Executive Officer aboard the USS Leftwich, to name a few. Ashore, Admiral Tidd served as a 35th Assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as the Joint Staff Director and Vice Director for Operations J3, his most recent position prior to his current command. He also spent 3 years as a National Security Council staff as Director for Strategic Capabilities Policy and as a Director for Combating Terrorism. He was the founding Deputy for Operations on the Chief of Naval Operations War on Terrorism, Operations Planning Group Deep Blue, which was established after the terrorist attack on September 11th. He was the Assistant Chief of Staff for Operations at U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, U.S. 5th Fleet, Bahrain. During his career, Admiral Tidd also served in several key positions both in the Pentagon and within NATO. Admiral Tidd was awarded the Legion of Honor by the government of France and holds several additional decorations and awards, to include 2 awards of the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal, and 4 awards of the Legion of Merit. These are a few highlights from Admiral Tidd's long distinguished career and service to the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Admiral Tidd.
Wes, thank you very much for those very kind and far too long introductory remarks. Barry, it's a pleasure to be here. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be back here at the Atlantic Council. As was mentioned, I spent time as a fellow here. Back then it was in the old Grange building, tucked away behind the old executive office building. And all I can say is the basement broom closet that the fellows worked out of back then is a far cry from where the fellows are working now. So things have really improved here at the Atlantic Council. My congratulations. And to all of the fellows who are out there, you guys got it pretty good. It's a sweet deal here. Okay. I appreciate being here, especially because this group shapes the national conversation about our future. It talks about our prosperity and about our security. So it's good to be back here, and I look forward to the opportunity not just to make a few remarks, but more importantly, an opportunity for discussion and to listen to your questions. I've been asked to talk about U.S. Southern Command's strategic approach to Latin America and the Caribbean. I think it's important to note that this approach is not taking place in isolation. As Defense Secretary Carter and Chairman Dunford have noted, we're in the middle of a strategic transition that touches every corner of the globe. Today's security environment is profoundly different from those of previous generations. Uncertainty, unpredictability, and trans-regional linkages are the defining characteristics of the world today. That's true for the Asia-Pacific region, for Europe, and it's even truer for the Western Hemisphere. Proximity and shared borders add another dimension to an already complex environment. So when we think about Latin America, we have to first recognize there's no longer any such thing as a regional challenge, as if there ever really was such a thing. From the activities of China and Russia, to the illicit flows of drugs, weapons, and people, to natural disasters and humanitarian crises, the challenges that we confront in this part of the world have one thing in common. They are trans-regional. They cross borders and they cross boundaries. They affect not just this hemisphere, but the rest of our world. And, as you would expect, events occurring in other parts of the world impact us here as well. At U.S. Southern Command, we're thinking hard about this and what it means for our approach. So this afternoon, I would like to offer you some reflections based on my first 6 months in command. And I'd like to share with you the framework through which we view our partnerships with the region. This framework centers around maintaining our competitive advantage in the defense and security sectors, countering transnational threat networks, and rapid response to crises. As we developed our framework, I asked our team at U.S. SOUTHCOM to help me think through 3 questions. Questions whose answer will inform our strategy for engaging with this increasingly important region. Here's the first question. How should we view the activities of China, Russia, Iran, and the Western Hemisphere? So I get this question a lot, especially here inside the Beltway, but also by several of our partners throughout the region. There tend to be 2 views. Some say that these so-called external actors don't pose a significant challenge to U.S. interests in Latin America, at least in the near term. Others worry that we're ceding ground in a global game of influence and leadership. Here's how I see it. What happens in Latin America or the Caribbean can't be divorced from what's happening in the rest of the world. If you care about China's adherence to internationally accepted rules and norms, you may want to better understand their activities in this region. If you're concerned about Russia's conduct in Eastern Europe, you may want to pay attention to what they're doing much closer to home. And if you worry about things like state sponsorship of terrorism, Iran's involvement in the Western Hemisphere remains a matter of concern. So regardless of which of these countries is doing the engaging, there is a set of collective expectations held by all nations in the Western Hemisphere. Any nation seeking to build regional relationships should respect the inter-American principles of peace, the rule of law, and transparency. Now, these aren't just shared values. They're codified in the Organization of American States and inter-American democratic charters. And the truth is, nations like China, Russia, and Iran have a mixed track record, at best, on some of these issues. There are aspects of their approach to engagement that are concerning, especially if you care, like the United States cares, about the importance of human rights, of good governance, and of a rules-based international order. Now keep in mind, there is no Chinese, Russian, or Iranian equivalent to the Leahy Law. No comparable congressional conditions on security assistance, little transparency when it comes to defense cooperation. And, in the case of Russia, absolutely no qualms about spreading disinformation about the United States and our intentions in the region. So it's important that we closely scrutinize and clearly understand the activities of these actors in the Western Hemisphere. But as I've been telling our team at U.S. Southern Command, we must view this as an opportunity, not just a challenge. To paraphrase Jeff Bezos, let's let others focus on competing with us while we stay focused on strengthening our partnerships in Latin America and in the Caribbean. At U.S. SOUTHCOM, we're challenging ourselves to take a hard look at how we share information, how we create cross-functional teams, and more importantly, how we earn the region's trust, and just as important, how we keep it. Last week, we had a major first. We invited our partner nation liaison officers to participate in our weekly operations and intelligence brief. Now, historically at SOUTHCOM, this meeting, held at the secret no foreign level, was closed to our foreign audiences, even those serving at our headquarters. I've asked that we do a better job of empowering our team, including our partner nation liaison officers, with knowledge. Knowledge that builds trust. Knowledge that expands our friendly networks. Knowledge that, when applied in a cohesive manner, will make us all more effective in defending our shared home. We're also exploring ways to offer our partners access to cutting-edge research, new technologies, and experimentation opportunities that will advance our collective efforts to confront complex security challenges. Which brings me to my second question. How do we address those complex challenges? In Latin America and the Caribbean, the overarching security challenge is a very big one indeed. The destabilizing operations, corruptive influence, and global reach of transnational threat networks. Now, that's quite a mouthful, so let me break it down. You want to transport cocaine and heroin from South America into every major global market. In our region, there's a network for that. You want to smuggle weapons from the United States to the Caribbean and Mexico? We've got networks for that too. You've illegally mined gold and in the process destroyed river ecosystems and deforested hundreds of acres of rainforest. And you want to sell it for several $1 million in the booming international gold market. We've got networks for that. You want to traffic tens of thousands of women and children, many of whom wind up prisoners of the sex trade? We have, all too appallingly, all too many networks in this region for that. You need to move people with known terrorist ties from the Middle East up through South and Central America and over the U.S.-Mexico border. We've got networks for that too. You want to spread an extremist message in the Caribbean and recruit fighters for ISIL. We have a worrisome number of networks engaged in that. You need to legitimize millions of dollars in illicit profits every year? Well, you're in luck. We have many networks for that, including sub-networks that specialize in laundering dirty money, exploiting free trade zones, and in some cases, helping funnel cash to international terrorist organizations. I could go on, but I think you get the point. To break this down a little further, the most sophisticated of these networks are marketing two things. First, a highly efficient logistical infrastructure that spans the globe. These networks control the distribution hubs and smuggling routes that span the Western Hemisphere and lead into the United States. They lead into Europe, and they lead to Africa. They have enough capital to buy off judges, police officers, even entire villages to ensure freedom of movement. The second, the most powerful networks offer what all powerful networks offer: a dense web of social connections to facilitators, enablers, and supporters here in the region and across the world. This can come in the form of corrupted local officials, unscrupulous accountants, and in the case of extremist networks, ideologues and influencers who nurture the radicalization process and foster the spread of violent ideology. So when we look at these myriad networks, it's clear we need to look beyond just this section of the world. And we need to look beyond simply stopping drugs. That's a big part of it, of course, not just for our public health, but also for the financial blow that it can deal to many of these organizations. But simply stopping the drugs is no longer enough. I've charged our SOUTHCOM team to do everything we can to be better partners to our U.S. government colleagues and to be sure that we are offering the best support possible to their efforts. As a few examples, we're lending our capabilities to the multi-agency operational Citadel, which is targeting human smuggling networks in the Americas. And just this week, we're hosting an interagency cooperation workshop at our headquarters. We've encouraged representatives from across law enforcement, diplomatic, and development agencies to come together to learn more about what each of us are doing in Latin America. We'll exchange ideas and discuss our respective strengths and our limitations. Now, this may surprise some of you, but we don't often come together like this. We talk a lot about dismantling networks, but we almost never talk about building our own. If the result of this workshop is a new opportunity for U.S. SOUTHCOM to support one of our interagency partners, that's great. And if other agencies and departments find new ways to work together, well, that's even better. Later this year, we hope to do the same thing with our partners in Latin America. And we're all doing this for one very simple reason. Because we know that none of us, no single department or agency, and no single nation can do it alone. So, if we're serious about combating these networks, it will truly require all hands on deck. Now that brings me to the final question. Are we ready for what comes next? Are we at U.S. SOUTHCOM prepared to respond to the inevitable natural disaster or epidemic that lies in wait just around the corner? Are we prepared to play our role as part of our larger national security enterprise dedicated to disrupting, as Chairman Dunford puts it, trans-regional, multi-domain, and multifunctional threats? At U.S. SOUTHCOM, we're training hard to get to yes. We're honing our rapid response capabilities and improving interoperability. We're working hard to increase the interoperability among the forces that make up our hemisphere's security enterprise. For example, a core element of our engagement strategy focuses on building partner nations' military healthcare systems to better detect, prevent, and respond to regional health epidemics. We're also conducting multinational exercises like Exercise Panamax that's about to kick off at the end of this month. We'll test our collective ability to defend our region's most vital strategic asset, the newly expanded Panama Canal. The most significant aspect about this year's Panamax is not its size, its focus, or its longevity. It's that for the first time ever, all of the multinational components, the Land Component Commander, Air Component Commander, Maritime Component Commander, and Special Operations Commanders will be led by our capable partners. Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Brazil will be serving as the overall Deputy Multinational Force Commander. And U.S. Southern Command is synchronizing a full range of efforts in full partnership with fellow regional and functional combatant commanders to be able to detect, illuminate, and when directed, disrupt global, transnational, and trans-regional threats to our nation's security. And as I reflect on the past 6 months, it's this last example that should remind us just how fortunate we are to have a unique command like U.S. Southern Command. We're fortunate to work with partners that understand what shared responsibility is all about. Partners who are eager and willing to contribute to regional and international security. We're fortunate to have the dedicated men and women of U.S. Southern Command, civilians and service members, who are deeply engaged in a part of the world that is itself deeply important to our culture, our security, and our economic prosperity. Finally, we at U.S. SOUTHCOM are fortunate to work in a part of the world where threats are not yet insurmountable, a part of the world where challenges aren't yet intractable. And when it comes to addressing these threats and challenges, we are proud to say that we too have a network for that. So thank you. And with that, I'd like to move to the questions. All right.
Very good. You knocked off at least one or two of my questions.
Perfect.
So that's good. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Christina Wong, defense reporter for The Hill. Very pleased to moderate this discussion. I thought I'd ask a few broad picture questions and then open it up for audience Q&A. So get your questions ready. The first question has to do with Venezuela. The situation is increasingly dire, it sounds. It's triggered by a steep drop in oil. U.S. companies are scaling back there. There's shortages of food and basic supplies. Looting and crime is up. The question is, what do you worry about in terms of Venezuela, and how and what potential secondhand effects are you seeing in other countries in the region, and perhaps the U.S.?
You know, it's less a question of what do I worry about. It's what does the region, as it looks at the challenging situation there, worry about. And all of our partners in the region obviously are watching the situation very, very closely. I know that we are live tweeting this broadcast, and so for all of you out there on Twitter who have been reading the incessant remarks that I am in fact engaged in some sort of planning activity, I'd just like to say, for the record, I am not planning the invasion of Venezuela. So.
And the hashtag is, I believe it's AC Defense, if you want to participate in the discussion. Going north a little bit to Central America, the countries of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, the violence there is now worse than ever since the 1980s, and that in part has caused a surge of migrants coming to the U.S., although not as many as in 2014. And some in Congress say that we should stop deporting and do more to address the situation and violence and instability in the region that's forcing people to leave. Is that easier said than done? What and how long would that take? You know,
the United States is already doing a significant amount, and with the support of Congress, providing resources to be able to improve the economic development situation in Central America, specifically the northern tier countries of Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, with great support from countries throughout the region, most notably Colombia, who is participating and directly supporting training efforts to help the security officials there be able to deal with the security challenges. You're right. The level of insecurity is significant, and it poses questions to families as they try to decide what should they do when they face this insecurity. And with murder rates the highest in the world, it's a significant problem. I guess if you are a glasses half full type of person, which I think most of us in the security business have to be, or we wouldn't do it, the governments are making sincere efforts to try to address those challenges. They recognize that they have problems with governance. They have problems with the historical levels of corruption that have undermined faith in the government on the part of the populations. What's probably new and different is the populations themselves have the means, thanks to social media, to hold their governments accountable in ways that they've not been able to hold them accountable for before. And they're taking advantage of that. And so we're seeing the militaries themselves taking very, very serious steps to improve their accountability, significantly improving their respect for human rights. That's an effort that it's a foundational effort of the work that we at US SOUTHCOM do to help them prepare them to be able to enjoy the confidence of their populations. The police forces in many of the countries are significantly challenged, and although all of us believe that it is the proper role of police forces to provide for the internal security and deal with crime in the countries, in many instances the governments, their back is to the wall. The militaries have been pressed into providing support to the police forces. None of them want to stay in that business. All of them are interested in working themselves out of that job, but it's going to be an effort that just as we have seen in other parts of the world that have long and difficult and intractable security problems, it requires patience, it requires sustained commitment and efforts. Congress has demonstrated very strong support for our partners in Central America. We need to continue to do our part, and as do the partners across the region.
Earlier this year, you testified improving the conditions within Central America is a whole-of-government approach, and you need to work with the governments in order to improve the conditions there, and it's a 30-year fight. Can you talk a little bit more about how difficult it will be to help those nations improve conditions inside their country?
You know, I think first I would salute the heroic efforts on the part of our country teams led by the ambassadors, very capable ambassadors that we have in the countries in Central America, who are leading a true whole of government effort within that individual country team. We at SOUTHCOM are doing everything we possibly can do to provide the best possible support, to share with them information, provide training capabilities to be able to partner with host nation militaries, to be able to improve their capabilities to secure their countries. But again, this is going to be a process, as we saw in El Salvador back in the 80s, as we saw in Colombia for the last 20 years. It takes a sustained effort. It takes strategic patience. We're going to have to work at it. Ultimately, the efforts will be taken by the nations themselves. Our job is to support them, to provide them with assistance and tools that they might need. But ultimately, they are the ones that are engaged in the fight now. And just as Colombia provided by far the lion's share of the resources to bring their country back from the brink of failed state status, and did by far the lion's share of the fighting on behalf of their country, we see this as an effort that will require probably decades in order to resolve.
And on to another topic that's affecting us here at home, drug trafficking. You've compared getting at the drug problem to squeezing a balloon, and we need to squeeze across the entire breadth and depth of the network. If we stop them at one point, they'll go somewhere else. You testified that you're seeing drugs coming into more stable places like Panama. You've also said we're going to see a very significant increase in cocaine production. Can you talk a little bit more about
Sure.
the impacts of those trends?
Yeah. Colombia and the United Nations have already begun to report the coca production rates are continuing to rise. There are a number of reasons for that, some of them understandable and predictable, and some of them very unfortunate. But I think the key point that we need to continue to remember, especially here in North America, that cocaine is being produced and those production rates are up because the consumption rates are driving it. And the lion's share of the consumption occurs right here in the United States. Other countries now are beginning to experience the scourge of cocaine consumption. Countries in Europe, countries in the Pacific, and sadly in our own hemisphere as well. So we need to address the issue of consumption. That's what's driving the increase in the production rates. Now, that said, and I keep coming back to the point, if you were to somehow magically eliminate overnight all the cocaine in the world so that it went away, I'm convinced that we would continue to see these threat networks engage in activities and criminal activities in order to sustain their position or attempt to sustain their hold on power and the control that they have over regions. They are transporting drugs right now because that is lucrative and makes a lot of money. But there are many other criminal activities that they engage in that in some ways are even more worrisome and cause greater problems. We see in Colombia and Peru illegal mining of gold that leads to massive deforestation and destruction of river ecosystems. And the challenging problem there is when that gold leaves the country, it's not illegal to possess gold. So significant problems for the environment and for the country's security. We see trafficking in people heading north. We see trafficking in weapons and money heading south. And so basically all manner of criminal activity these networks engage in. So when I focus on the security threat, rather than focusing on the commodity that moves through the network, I think we need to focus our efforts and attention on what can we do to squeeze those networks, apply pressure literally across their length and their breadth. Because as has been mentioned, if we just squeeze in one country, if we just squeeze in one part of the region, it expands in other parts and leads to significant problems in those areas.
And heroin use is a huge epidemic in this country. Administration officials testified this year that destroying tens of thousands of acres would help. What do you think we should do to focus, first to focus on this problem? Is this working with partner governments, interdicting the drugs, eradicating the drugs, reducing drug demand, development assistance, all of the above?
Yes, and yes. And literally, I mean, it goes without saying, you have to work holistically, all of those problems. You've got to work the demand side of the problem. And the ONDCP, the Counter-Drug Office, is working on the demand side of the problem and addressing that. We're also obviously making significant efforts on reducing the production, the supply, working in the countries in which the drugs are produced. But I think ultimately it's tackling the networks and the networks that are engaged in moving that illicit product, whether it's heroin moving from Mexico up into the United States or cocaine that's moving from the Andean Ridge up into the United States, down into Brazil, across into Europe and Africa.
And with the opening of flights soon to and from Cuba, are you worried that that might give these global criminal networks another avenue to get things inside the U.S.? NORTHCOM Commander Bill Gortney said often drugs come in every which way, and illicit material it comes in every which way, including legally, just in small amounts. Are you worried that you might see some illicit material come through Cuba into the U.S.?
I wouldn't single out any one route or any one country. I think the pathways, as Admiral Gortney mentioned, are plentiful, and so we've got to be working across the entire breadth of them.
But is that a particular concern of yours that you might want to get ahead of before these flights begin, and how?
I think the good work that's going on right now in our newly reopened embassy in Cuba, talking with security officials to address this issue. I think we need to wait and see how those conversations go, and provide them the opportunity to see. It certainly is envisionable that there are areas that we should have conversations with the Cubans on ways that we can get after the security challenges in the region. They are here in the region. The same waters that wash our shores wash their shores, and so it's a conversation that's taking place.
I'm just going to throw this one in. Can you talk about your interaction with the Cuban military? I know there's been several engagements with the USNS Comfort, I believe, and most recently at a conference hosted by Jamaica. Have there been any other engagements? And can they play? What kind of role do you see the Cuban military playing?
I think time will tell. And to answer your second question first, only time will tell. It's going to be a long discussion, and we'll just have to see how it unfolds. It's primarily diplomatic efforts at this point, and I think it's best leaving it in the hands of our professional diplomats to work out the modalities on that. As you mentioned, we had opportunities for discussions between our military medical personnel on board Comfort and Cuban military medical personnel who were both engaged in a humanitarian mission in Haiti. Those are areas in which probably bear further discussion. We have had a regional security conference co-hosted by Jamaica, and the Jamaicans invited the Cubans to that conference, and they attended, and we were able to discuss items of mutual concern, security issues across the region. So I think that's positive. That's a very good first step. Only time will tell, and I won't predict how long or what the depth will be.
I wanted to talk about Islamic extremism in Latin America. You mentioned in your opening remarks there's some recruiting going on. What is the current state of Islamic extremism in Latin America, and do you see the potential of an ISIS presence?
Short answer, yes. We see that radicalization is occurring. When I talk with my counterparts in various countries throughout the region, all of them recognize that the potential for radicalization, and especially this phenomena of self-radicalization, internet-inspired or facilitated self-radicalization, is something that they are beginning to see crop up. It is obviously a lesson that we have all taken from the tragic events in Brussels, in Paris, in San Bernardino, in Orlando, in Istanbul. I mean, it goes on and it goes on and on. I'm sorry, not Istanbul, but in Turkey. So it's a problem for all of us. It is something that we all have to pay attention to. It's a problem that only by sharing information effectively, understanding what the root causes of that radicalization may be, the populations that are most susceptible to the radicalization, and addressing those issues to try to find out why are people becoming radicalized, and what steps can be taken to give them viable alternatives so that they don't radicalize. But it's a challenge that literally we can find throughout the region.
And can you talk a little bit more about what Russia, Iran, and China are doing? You mentioned opening up our operational meeting to allies in the region. Is that one step you've taken to counteract what Russia has been doing, basically trying to discredit the U.S.?
We think, you know, the truth is our best ally and our closest friend. And when we explain to people what we are doing and we show, I mean, we have the ability to use great transparency to be able to show what we are doing and explain that. We think that is a very compelling story. As I said, it's not that we are competing. We think there are others who would like to displace the United States as the security partner of choice throughout the region. We think that we have shared interests, shared culture, clearly shared history, and we have opportunities to be able to work together in a very constructive manner with the countries of the region. We think that's a story that tells itself.
So Russia is not successful in its efforts to discredit us?
They certainly are trying. They're making some significant investments.
In weapon sales, I believe, to the region?
Some of it, and as well as just broadcasts on RT and other networks that they use in order to tell stories that are patently false. And so, you know, again, truth is our ally. The truth is our strongest friend, and we've got a compelling story to tell.
And Iran, what is the state of Hezbollah in the region?
It is obviously an area that we have to watch very, very closely. There are sympathizers who are engaged in fundraising and engaged in criminal activity to raise funds that are channeled towards support of Hezbollah. So again, it's keeping our eyes open and being aware, sharing information very, very effectively with our partners, so that we all have a common understanding where threats might be coming from, where our interests are, and where those interests overlap.
Do we see any more Iran opening up any more cultural centers? Have we seen their behavior change in the region since the Iran nuclear deal?
It's probably too soon yet to tell. It's only been a year since that deal has been engaged. They were very aggressive in attempting to find diplomatic partnerships with countries in order to break out of the diplomatic isolation that the sanctions had placed them under. And so I think time will tell as we see how their behavior changes over the coming years.
And China, it sounds like China has been very active in the region.
And again, it's primarily economic purposes. They're here. They have markets. They are looking for raw materials and are heavily engaged in garnering those raw materials. But if you speak with international bankers, they will tell you that it bears close watching. The banking arrangements, the financial deals, the loans and things made by the government of China don't have the same degree of transparency that are generally accepted as the rules of the game. So I think it's just something that we all need to be mindful of, and we ought to understand exactly what those relationships entail.
I wanted to ask you a resource question, the inevitable resource question. I won't ask you about sequestration, though, because we're not sure if that's going to happen next year. But as you've said yourself, SOUTHCOM is, you know, the lowest priority of all the combatant commands, and in part because of lack of military threats from nations in the region. Earlier this year, you testified you had about 6 ships, give or take, out of an established requirement of 21 to do 40% of the drug interdiction mission, and you have 11% of your ISR requirements are being met. Do you have enough resources to carry out your mission, and have you asked for more?
There is no
As if you would tell me here.
No regional combatant commander who will ever say he has enough resources. So we understand that. And of course, yes, we identify clearly what we believe our requirements to be, and we submit them. From a previous assignment that I had as the Director of Operations on the Joint Staff, I was heavily involved in that process of racking and stacking requests that came in from all the region commanders and attempting to allocate resources or suggest to the Secretary of Defense, who makes the ultimate decision on the allocation, but to suggest or recommend where we think the resources ought go. And so, I guess proof positive that the assignment officer process it has a sense of humor, and that I'm now living with the results of the decisions that I was engaged in over the last few years. But the reality is, I don't fault the prioritization as it's been made. As a global nation with global interests, we have a responsibility to provide certain resources across the globe. And the reality is, we run out of resources before we run out of mission. So that's the reality that we live in. How do we deal with it? We try to mitigate some of those shortcomings. I am enormously thankful of the efforts on the part of the U.S. Coast Guard to surge additional Coast Guard forces into the SOUTHCOM region in order to partially make up some of that demand signal. And they've been terrific, and they provide basically the lion's share of the maritime forces. I like to say that the maritime forces that are in my theater all have white hulls and orange stripes. And I'm proud of that and happy with that because they do a terrific job in the mission. Could we use more? Absolutely. What we also try to do to make up for the shortfall is work very closely with partner nations, help build their capacity, provide them with some basic tools that will help them. They've got the desire, they've got the intent, basically some tools, and Congress has been very generous in providing us with resources that we can use to help some of these countries develop the tools and the training required so they can very aggressively go out and conduct some of these missions that otherwise we would be engaged in conducting. So we need to continue to take advantage of all manner of opportunities to increase the capability of our partners, to increase their capacity, and then to come up with creative ways to make best use of limited resources that we do receive, find innovative solutions that perhaps were not the original intended role of certain tools and capabilities, make very aggressive use of experimentation and systems that maybe are being developed for a different mission in a different theater and need some test and evaluation. And we advertise SOUTHCOM as try it here first, that we will eliminate the bureaucratic hurdles that might be in the way of conducting experimentation, and we'll provide meaningful feedback against a real valid mission set in the development of some of these tools. So it's a wide range of things. None of them are sufficient in and of themselves. We pull them together, and then we try to find new ways to deal with the challenges. Would I like more resources? You bet.
I have two more questions before I go to the audience. Have leaders in the region expressed any kind of concern over the presidential elections? What have they said to you, and what have you told them?
I think they recognize that as a serving military officer, they're not going to get much of an answer from me.
Damn. Well, had to try. And to end on a positive note, can you talk about a good news story? Ending on my portion of the questions here, but can you talk about the good news story in the region, perhaps about Colombia, and what sort of the lessons that might hold for other, long-term U.S. presences in Iraq and Afghanistan and other regions of the world?
I think there are a number of good news stories that are out there, and when you look across the region, as I mentioned in concluding my remarks, it is a region in which we do not have any ongoing state-on-state conflict, combat operations. We have states that are coming together and overcoming, in some cases, a century or more of difficult relationships and animosity in order to work together in constructive manners. We have countries that provide enormously capable and professional military forces to underpin some of our most difficult and critical UN peacekeeping operations. So those are the kinds of good news stories that are out there. We have democracy basically on the march in many countries where populations are holding their elected officials accountable, and where militaries are allowing the democratic process to move forward because they recognize that that is the best way to lead to a prosperous, peaceful, and stable society. So in terms of good news stories, there's plentiful opportunities. We have partners who are eager to work with us, and we just need to find the best possible ways to meet them as equal partners, and nothing else, but as equal partners. So I'm pretty excited.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions. Looks like there's quite a few right off the bat. Let's start with this gentleman over here, since he's physically closest to the stage.
Good afternoon.
Oh, and please identify yourself.
My name is Martin Anderson. I'm a decorated national security whistleblower from my time at the Justice Department, and more recently, I'm a whistleblower at U.S. Southern Command. And I would like to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, I would really appreciate if you could send my best regards to your brother, because I know of his work in military chaplaincy has been fantastic. and I do really appreciate all of his efforts. More to the point, though, and I don't want to get into the particulars, but of the case of the Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies, the William Perry Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies, that was now under investigation by the Inspector General's office after Senator Carl Levin, when he was chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, asked that that be done. That was as a result of what I and one of my colleagues at CHDS did as national security whistleblowers. But I would like to go to the whole issue of the value that the William Perry Center has today. When it was established 20 years ago, it was done because there was an idea that in Latin America there weren't enough civilians that really understood military issues, and therefore you needed to get something going so that civilians had better control. Putting aside the issues that the Inspector General is looking at now, what do you think is the efficacy and efficiency of the Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies, given the fact that there are many, many civilian experts in Latin America? You had mentioned, for example, that fighting against Putin, you have to fight on the battlefield of human rights and transparency. Do you think that CHDS has provided that kind of image to Latin America? It is under investigation. That investigation was asked for.
Okay. I think we need a limit to one question.
Thank you.
If you could, okay, great.
I can speak to my personal experience with the Perry Center, who is engaged in very useful, helpful work in organizing training opportunities to be able to work with ministries in countries that don't have a history of being able to do what we would call in the U.S. military requirements-based planning, to identify requirements and translate those into most prudent and best use of scarce resources. And so the work that they're doing there, I think, is needs to continue. So thanks.
Okay, sir in the front row here.
Randy Pistana, Florida International University. My question is regarding militarized policing in Central America, most notably the PMOP. I know there's been citizen demand for militarized policing because of the failure of the polices. Do you anticipate this as a short-term trend or a long-term solution?
I think if you speak with the military leaders themselves of the countries, none of them want to stay in that line of work any longer than possible. And so they are working hard to work themselves out of a job. So thanks.
Okay, this lady in the back here, in the middle.
Admiral, I'm Suzanne Miller, formerly with the U.S. Justice Department. Thank you so much for your remarks. We appreciate it. I wanted to ask you what connections you're seeing, if any, in the Latin America and Caribbean regions between human trafficking, organized crime, and international terrorism.
First, thanks to DOJ and the great work that DOJ does within the country teams throughout the region to try and address some of these challenges. It's a daunting problem. The good news is the countries themselves are coming together, and I think due to the good work that's going on within our embassies to draw attention to the problem and create recognition that it is another form of intensely destructive criminal activity that tears apart the fabric of the societies where it's located. And so it is no longer turning a blind eye to the problem and beginning to address it. Is there more work to be done? Absolutely. It goes without saying.
Okay, and over here, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Simone Williams, and I'm a student at American University. One of my questions, sorry, I actually have just one question. My question for you is, knowing the prioritization for South Command and the minimal resources that you do have, knowing that you have to be innovative, as you spoke about with all the partnerships that you do, what are some innovative ways of combating increase intelligence sharing and information and training and things of that nature with partnerships to combat that challenge?
Terrific question, and ultimately I think it hinges on how are we able to create trust. Trust between, just internal to our own U.S. departments and agencies in sharing information, a recognition that we all have key roles to play. We all have key strengths and attributes that we bring to the problem sets. None of us have enough resources to be able to do the mission in isolation. So we've got to build the linkages and the alliances. We've got to do it internal to our U.S. departments and agencies. We've got to share information. You know, as the lessons that we learned after 9/11 are the challenge that we had in being able to trust each other with specific sensitive pieces of information. Then you expand that to sharing information between countries, recognizing that the ability to protect that information is critical, but that if we can't share the information, if we keep it stovepiped and closely held, then we won't be able to accomplish the mission that we need to. So how do you build trust? How do you sustain trust? And how do you actively every single day be on the lookout for things that may inadvertently rupture that trust and try to avoid them? And it's something that I find I spend an enormous amount of my time talking about it within the headquarters, talking about it when I go out to the field and I meet with the U.S. military men and women who are working inside of our embassy country teams, the men and women that we have deployed on missions and operations and exercises across the region. You know, what is their role? How can they build trust? How can they establish the bonds of trust with those personal relationships and partnerships that they build with the individual countries that they find themselves in? We find enormous success from our National Guard, who have a state partnership program where they build a sustained relationship where the same state goes back to the same country and works with them year after year after year, many times the same people going back year after year after year. If you talk to Colombia, for instance, the state of South Carolina and their National Guard is the state partner program, and they have been working together for literally 4 years and know each other and on a first name basis and have been so for years. Those are the kinds of things that we can do, you know, that puts I think the lie to this narrative that the United States is withdrawing from the region, that we don't have interest in the region. I mean, we absolutely do, and our goal is to do everything we can do to reestablish trust with partners in the region where we might have had problems in the past.
And we'll go right up here to the front.
Admiral, thank you very much. Alexander Kravitz, former diplomat. Just a quick follow-up on that young lady's question. For the layman, if you were to, I think this is very interesting, this intelligence sharing, that, you know, what you've just been telling us about. But for the layman, if you were to compare, let's say, NATO intelligence sharing, which is, you know, a formal alliance, et cetera, and let's say give it a 10, how would you rate?
You're being generous.
Oh, well, whatever number you give it, an 8, a 6, you know. But the point is, how would you give a number? What number would you give to this incipient effort, just to kind of have an idea? And then I'd like to ask you about Venezuela, where we're all relieved to know that you're not planning the invasion. But what do you see the scenario there that, you know, scenarios that could play out? I mean, you know, disruption of oil supplies. I mean, there just seems to be a humanitarian crisis in the making. What might you see, you know, sort of best case, worst case? Thank you.
Let me, and I apologize in advance because it may seem that I'm ducking the question. I'm not, but it doesn't serve a useful purpose for me to spend a long time talking about Venezuela because it simply gets twisted into the propaganda machine, and so it's, you know, the whole region, the whole world is I think, you know, it breaks their heart to see the situation of the Venezuelan people. Now, to get at the issue of you mentioned intelligence sharing. I prefer to use the term information sharing because, and there's a reason for that. Intelligence gets wrapped up in all kinds of very, very convoluted protections and laws and things. And really what we're talking about is sharing information that allows us to better do our job and sharing understanding and appreciation and perspective. And so that is much easier to do and is it's not as bound up in oftentimes in different national statutes and regulations. And frankly, from an operational perspective, operational information is what we are best able to share. So we often we point to our Joint Interagency Task Force that's headquartered in Key West, Florida, that is focused, it is an interagency and a multinational task force that's engaged in dealing with the counter-drug mission. And I've lost track because we continue to add new liaison officers there, but it's something between, I think, around 15 to 20 different nations represented by liaison officers. Some of them are military, some of them are law enforcement, depending on the country and who they want to have participate there. But they bring the information from whatever their national capabilities are, and they pool their information, and they share that picture, that shared situational awareness of where these trafficking networks are, where they're operating, and then are able to operationalize that, pass that information to all of the nations who are engaged in the effort to interdict smuggling of drugs at sea, in the air. And so it is a very effective teamwork partnership that takes place there. So that tells me when it's important enough to us, we can find means to do it. We have other examples where we pool information on a multinational basis. If it's important enough to us, we will do it. We will make the means available, and we will bring the people together, and we will share this information. What I can do is I can help create the venue to bring the people together and to build those personal relationships so that on a personal basis we trust each other enough to be able to share information that will allow us to deal with problems that are common to all of our nations. But it's not easy, and you got to work at it every day.
To go to the back, sir.
Thank you. Richard Downey from Delphi Strategic Consulting, and thanks for a great presentation, Admiral. And before I ask my question, let me just say, as a former director of the Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies, the Perry Center, that I think the center, I agree with you, the center is and has done a great job, and they certainly need to continue. So thank you for your thoughts. If I could just follow through a little bit on your last remark regarding Venezuela and the building of relationships and all of that. And not to ask about the situation, but could you talk a little bit about whether there is any engagement that SOUTHCOM is having or perhaps not having with Venezuela, with your counterparts in the military there?
Yeah, there have been no military engagements between the United States and Venezuela for some time. So.
Okay.
Hi, Zach Biggs with Janes. I wanted to ask you about building partner capacity.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about being able to use some funds to help improve the capabilities of some of the countries that you're working with. Right now, there's a bit of a disagreement going on the Hill about whether the State Department and the FMS process should be controlling more of those funds versus COCOM commanders. Do you think it's important that COCOM commanders retain that ability to directly control some funds? How do you use those funds that are different and might be important, and what sort of coordination do you engage with the State Department on when you are helping build that partner capacity?
The funds that are under my direct control, I use in direct partnership and with the full, not just visibility, but concurrence and endorsement by the chief of mission in the country in which we're working. So, there's nothing that we do that isn't in full partnership with our friends at the State Department. So, I've read the stories. They're interesting, and I think ultimately the steps that we can take to make sure that we can make decisions and act on those decisions in a flexible and agile manner that provide the visibility and the oversight by those people who are most affected by it, I think is critical. So the relationship that U.S. SOUTHCOM has with the country teams, the relationship that we have with State West Hemisphere Bureau, I think is extraordinary. Thanks for being here, Paco. And that's just the level of work. So we're not going to do anything that doesn't have their full trust and understanding. Adding more layers into an approval process doesn't make it necessarily a better decision. It just adds more layers to an approval process.
Okay, and we'll go to this gentleman right here.
Thank you, Admiral Tidd. That's Adam Isaacson from the Washington
good to
Office
see
on
you.
Latin America. Now that you've been in command for a few months, I'd just like to hear your evaluation of how the Leahy Law is being implemented in your AOR.
I mean, it threads through pretty much all of our engagements in terms of the vetting that occurs by the embassy of the partner nation units that we work with. In the past, it was problematic because if a unit was placed in the penalty box, if you were, we didn't have a mechanism for a unit to be rehabilitated. And so now we've got an agreed process agreed to between the State Department and Department of Defense on how a unit can rehabilitate itself. The Leahy Law actually serves an incredibly valuable purpose because it provides a means for countries to know that it's important to hold themselves accountable and to hold their people accountable. And so what's important is that, you know, we recognize that, you know, no population is perfect. No people. We certainly are not. Our U.S. military is not 100% perfect, but we don't permit breaking of the rules with impunity. We have the means and the mechanisms to hold people who break the rules and hold them accountable. And so the government or the purpose of the Leahy Law is to provide a means to, you know, for other countries to be able to hold their people accountable and to provide the encouragement to do that. And you know, all of the senior leaders that I've met with, including some that have some units that right now are still being looked at, they recognize exactly what's required. They are taking the steps to put in place the legal proceedings that are required to be able to hold people who commit crimes, to hold them accountable. So the institutions, I think it's important that the institutions be accountable and that they are able to do that. And we see that by and large, that's happening now on a routine basis. And so that's beneficial. And now that we've got a means so that you can work your way through the process, you can get well, you can rehabilitate a unit. We think that's critically important because it provides a positive path forward for some of these relationships.
Before I go to the question in the back, I want to throw in one more question. I want to get your thoughts on some reforms that the Congress has mulled over, such as combining NORTHCOM and SOUTHCOM. I think I know what you're going to say, but what are your thoughts on that? And also the idea of creating a joint task force with all the services instead of having service-specific departments in each region. What do you think about those two things?
You know, I have read with interest a lot of the proposals by some very experienced individuals with prior military and policymaking experience. And I think truth in advertising, my career has been wholly shaped by Goldwater Nichols. And so when I first came into the military, if you did a tour outside of your parent branch of the armed forces, you know, it basically was the end of your career. You had been jettisoned by your parent organization, and so you avoided it at all costs. That changed very early in my career, and so as a result, I've spent the vast majority of my time as a flag officer serving in joint and interagency positions. So I've had a chance to work side by side, not just with partners from all branches of the armed forces, but literally with all members of the national security establishment. And so I cannot imagine a situation where we would want to turn the clock back on that. And so I think the mechanisms that were put in place for Goldwater Nichols have been beneficial to the military writ large. Some of the other suggestions that have come out, I think it always go back to first principles and try and ask yourself, what specific problem are we trying to solve? And then as we come up with solutions, does that really get at the problem that's been clearly identified, clearly articulated? You know, I guess one of the advantages or disadvantages of, you know, having been on active duty now for 38 years, I've been involved in 3 different UCP studies, modifications, looking at redrawing the boundary lines. All 3 of them included a proposal to combine NORTHCOM and SOUTHCOM. In fact, well, one of them, you know, we didn't even have NORTHCOM at the time on the first one, but it was to just have a Western Hemisphere command. All of them ultimately came to the conclusion, if you think there is savings to be had there in terms of money or manpower or something else, there's not a whole lot there if you combine them. and further, when you look at the scope of the responsibilities, and especially the scope of the responsibilities today, SOUTHCOM is largely focused on building these partnerships and establishing the relationships and working very, very closely with our Latin American and Caribbean partners. NORTHCOM is focused exclusively on defense of the homeland. That's kind of a full-time job. I would want it to be a full-time job. So if you combine the two, there is risk of basically underperforming at both of them, or doing one of them well and completely abnegating your responsibilities on the other one. So, you know, I think the American people expect us to defend the homeland, absolutely, first and foremost purpose that we exist for. But secondly, I think they expect us to build these kinds of constructive partnerships with countries with whom we have such a remarkable shared culture, history, and shared future interests. And so, you know, 2 full-time jobs for my book, that recommendation, I haven't heard as much about it, you know, but it's one that I predict, you know, if I were to serve another 38 years, it'll probably be studied another, you know, 3 times in the future. And there may be a day, there may be a time, there may be the technology that will allow a solution like that to come into effect. There have been a number of other proposals that are out there. I think all of them bear serious study, consideration, evaluation. The notion of joint task forces. The challenge that you've got, in my view, no one geographic combatant commander is constructed identically, but we are all remarkably similar enough so that when we have to work together, we know how to work together. And if you start creating these kind of one-off different type models, that standardization kind of goes out the door, and the ability to be able to come together and work together effectively can be challenged. The issue of, you know, replacing service components with joint task forces. There's from a purely operational perspective, that's joint task forces do operations. Service components do this you know, task called service componency. They look out and they focus on translating from the service chief here in Washington down to the individual soldier, sailor, airman, marine in the field, you know, the organized, train, equip missions. So if you pulled that away from these subordinate headquarters that are subordinate to the combatant commanders, that task would still have to be performed someplace. You might pull it up to the combatant commander headquarters, but then you haven't really saved much. I mean, it's, you know, if you think you're saving manpower, you're still having to do those sorts of missions. So I think that's one. It bears studying. I think there's that. You know, we're really good at when the time comes up and we have to establish a mission for a specific a set of tasks. That's what a joint task force does. When you have to establish sustained relationships over a prolonged period of time, that's what obviously combatant commanders are very good at. And I think we just need to be very, very careful that when we come up with some solutions, they might address one perceived set of problems, but they might open up a whole slew of unintended consequences that would cause us real problems. And we would only discover them in a crisis, and that's a bad time to find out that you got a problem. So.
Thank you. I think I hogged up all the time for the last question. I'm sorry.
I'll take one more. Let me take one more. Yeah.
Okay, great. The person in the back with her hand up, I believe. If you'd like to forgo your question. Oh,
I
okay.
can forgo it. It's okay. Thank you.
Gentleman over here on the side. Yeah.
Hugh.
Yeah.
Hi. Getting back, there was the GOP. Hugh Grindstaff with THIS for Diplomats. The Republican platform urged the wall be built. This is not a political question.
Okay.
This is a national security question. If this phantom wall is built, your resources are really going to get tapped, because then it'll be going by sea and air. The infiltration of drugs will be coming that way. So you're really going to be challenged. Wouldn't there be a briefing of someone somewhere to let Donald Trump know where is he going to come up with the resources?
I think I'll leave that briefing to the appropriate people when the time comes, if it's required.
That's right.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much. I think the Admiral will be around for a couple of minutes. Please thank me and join me in thanking him.